Hello everyone, before this video starts, I would appreciate if you guys would leave a like and subscribe since your support means the world to me and allows me to make these types of videos. Now, let's get into the video. By the time I turned to Van for help, my life had become a living hell, and I was desperate enough to try anything. My condo, it seemed, was haunted. The experience is nothing like what you'd watch some oblivious horror B-movie character blunder through, though. In fact, I mistook my first encounter for a home invasion, but after what I discovered in the spare bedroom, I knew I needed the kind of help police couldn't provide. Hours of combing cryptid chat rooms and amateur ghost hunting channels led me to this posting by a gentleman named Van Becken. Tired of living with tough-to-tackle pests? Other exterminators can't seem to get their hands around the problem? Call Van Becken for a free consultation. From his thick accent over the phone, I guessed he was a Midwesterner. Probably Minnesotan. I can be there this evening, for sure. Prompt and punctual, Van arrived at my doorstep at the stroke of 6, carrying a duffel bag and a clear Pyrex full of lasagna. "I brought you hot dish?" He held out the container and flashed a toothy smile. Thanks. Here, come in." It wasn't until I took the plate that I realized he had been supporting it with a black and silver prosthetic hand. His fur-collared work jacket made it difficult to tell whether the rest of his arm was artificial as well. He had a hardened, grizzled look that didn't quite match his friendly demeanor. Between his salt and pepper hair and bushy chevron mustache, I guessed he was in his late 30s. "So where's the trouble happening?" "Right over here." Van carefully wiped his boots on my welcome mat before following me into the kitchen. "This cabinet is where the, disturbance starts. I've had to empty the whole thing out." I pointed to a stack of pots, pans, and the few unbroken dishes I had left, all piled on the countertop. "You wouldn't believe the crash this thing made when it first came through." He clicked on a flashlight and shone it inside the perfectly ordinary pantry cabinet, which was roughly the same size and width as the fridge beside it. Nothing unusual, I know. "Nothing we can see," Van corrected me. "Tell me about these encounters." Most nights around 1, I hear footsteps walking from the kitchen to the spare room. They stop there for a few minutes, then come back. Last few nights, though, it's been stopping at my bedroom door, scratching and growling. Van took a few steps down the hall, pausing to run his fingers across a set of deep claw marks. "I can see that. You sure this isn't some kind of animal problem? You call an exterminator?" "Definitely not an animal problem." I pointed back to the living room, where a home security camera kept a watchful digital eye on the apartment. "Nothing shows up in the footage. It's like I've got an invisible bear poking around my place." "Interesting." Van folded his arms. "You have any idea what it could be attracted to? Old family heirlooms, artifacts, or what have you?" "Don't laugh. I helped this poor grandmother once. Something caught the scent of this old necklace her husband brought back from France during the 40s. He trailed off. "There may be something in the closet." I shifted uncomfortably from side to side. "Show me." The second bedroom was a mess. Plastic drop cloths still covered the furniture. Cans of pistachio paint stood in a row beneath the window, and my sledgehammer leaned against the gaping hole it had made in the wall. Van whistled. "What on earth happened here?" I was trying to spruce the place up. Someone had plastered over some kind of doorway. Cracks were starting to show in the wall, see? It wouldn't take the paint. Previous owner didn't know anything about it, but the plans for the building showed there should be a closet space. "And you decided to bust it open?" "After I heard noises, yeah. Thought there might have been rodents or something back there." Van stuck his head through the opening and the open door beyond. "Okay, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened." "Like I said, I was worried something was behind the walls, so I went at it with the sledge. First swing, the hammer splintered the door behind the wall. It made a hole big enough that I could see through. There was this flickering light. Candles, sitting on that stone table." I pointed. "Stone altar," Van corrected. "And so, you tore down the rest of the wall to handle the apparent fire hazard, without ever wondering how someone got back there to light them." "Didn't occur to me at the time, no," I admitted. "I cleared away the wall and pushed in the door to see what was behind the wall. It had some resistance. Probably all these chain locks. Good grief, there's half a dozen of them." Van held up half of a rusted chain,
still dangling from the interior of the door frame. His eyes fell on the floor. Probably broke this salt line too. Yeah, I thought the door was just old or stuck, so I shoved my way inside and put out the candles. Van smacked his forehead. You put them out? Yeah. Did anything happen after that? I mean, right after that? There was a gust of air, the kind of cold that cuts right through to your bones. It blew right past me and then just sorta, I waved my hands. I don't know, disappeared into the closet. After that, I got this horrible feeling I shouldn't be there. Van stepped inside and began inspecting the walls. Did you see these? Come here. Watch your step. I followed his finger to a wreath of symbols surrounding the interior of the doorframe. Got your basic Dama clan ceiling glyphs here. He traced the inside of the doorway. Big one on the back. See? He closed the door partway, revealing a large rune, partially damaged by the sledgehammer blow. All these locks were keeping something on your side out, Van said. Out of where? I asked. That's the question, isn't it? But I've got another one first. How the hell have you managed to stay here this long? Most people would see this and run for the hills. Don't really have a choice. I've got an underwater mortgage and barely anything in the bank. No finances to pull off a move. What about friends? I shook my head again. New to the city. Family isn't in the picture either, for reasons I'd rather not get into. Put simply enough, I'm here or I'm homeless. Sorry to hear, Van gave a slow, sympathetic nod. I'm gonna help you as best I can, just as soon as we discuss my fee. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk.
With a bit of haggling, we had a handshake agreement. Van set up a tripwire trap with a bag of flour in front of the pantry cabinet, connected my camera to his laptop, and barricaded himself in the bedroom with me. We propped the display on the edge of the bed and watched in silence as the hour grew later.
Van grabbed my arm and pointed toward the screen. Look, he mouthed. Goosebumps erupted across my arms as I watched as the cabinet door creaked open on its own. With a low twang, the trip line snapped, tearing the hanging bag of flour in two. A cloud of white powder hung in the air for a moment, not settling on the ground as it should have. It clung to a hulking shape in my kitchen. Making out the details of my tormentor still proved tricky. It had fur, or long hair, it was hard to tell which, a long snout, and a prehensile tail that seemed to reach and prod around the room of its own volition. It lumbered down the hall on 2 feet, tracking white footsteps in its wake. Van pressed a finger to his lips. A guttural growl drew my attention from the viewing screen to the bedroom door. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how thin the barrier was. The creature scratched and slammed itself against the door, rattling the dresser and sending knickknacks flying from my bookshelf. Van braced his body against the barricade while I stood, paralyzed and sticky with stress sweat. Would this be the night it got in? Would it hurt, being torn to shreds by some unseen beast the size of a bear? Before the panicked thoughts could completely overwhelm my mind, the entity gave up its assault and continued its patrol into the guest room. A quiet sigh of relief escaped Van as he slumped against the dresser. Neither of us spoke a word until the camera feed showed the thing march back down the hall and into the kitchen, where it crawled back into the cabinet. Well, you for sure got a problem on your hands, friend. Van clapped me on the shoulder. I've got my work cut out for me, eh? We waited another 10 minutes before leaving the room, careful not to disturb the footprints left behind on the floor. Van started snapping pictures with a professional-looking camera. I just looked over his shoulder, trying to stay out of the way. The prints were easily more than a foot long and about half as wide. Each of the 4 toes ended with a formidable-looking claw. Never heard of any ghosts with claws like that, I said. Definitely not a ghost, Van agreed. Then you can't help me? My heart sank. Oh, lucky for you, I'm not a ghost hunter. I'm a trapper. He stepped around the flour pile on the kitchen floor and peered inside the still open cabinet. I just trap things that most people don't even know exist. He leaned inside the space, pressing against the back of the storage space. Still solid, he muttered to himself. Van straightened up, following the footprints down the hall and toward the second bedroom. I tiptoed after him to avoid disturbing the trail, which seemed to end mid-stride at the back of the closet. What do you make of this? I asked. He clicked his tongue. I think you've got a classic case of turtle tunnel going on here.
Pardon?
Turtle tunnel. You know, like a wildlife crossing, from the look on my face. He must have seen I still didn't get it. Think of it like this. A huge forest gets split in half by a highway. The road is scary. The animals can't understand it, certainly can't cross it. So the forests become two separate worlds. Let's say all the wolves ended up on that side of the forest. He pointed toward the kitchen. They don't have enough space to hunt. They're going to starve. A human realizes this, feels bad for them, and decides to make them a little tunnel through the human world that connects them to the rest of the forest. We just can't perceive the entrance and exit.
Sucks for all the critters minding their own business over there, I quipped.
Yes, Van clapped his hands together. What do you imagine those critters would do if they were smart enough to realize where their predators were coming from? Probably try to block it off. Realization dawned on me. They did block it off. Oh my gosh, I reopened the tunnel. Precisely. I leaned against the wall with my head in my hands. So what do I do now? Just let it happen. Van shook his head. Not a great idea. Whatever is cutting through your place is clearly tangible. If it can knock over your pots and pans and claw your door, it can smack you around too. Then we rebuild the barrier. First, we would need to understand how the barrier worked. And I don't. Do you? I shook my head. Luckily, there's another option. What's that? I asked.
We catch it. As it turned out, the first step in ending my nightly torment involved taking my remaining savings to the hardware store. We replaced my flimsy and mangled bedroom door with a steel one, complete with a heavy deadbolt, an impact plate, all held in place with 4-inch screws. There would be no more cowering behind the dresser barricade while we planned our strategy, which, I was quite annoyed to learn, did not include killing the damn thing.
I know it sucks to hear. Van snapped the lid of his toolbox shut. You're certainly a victim here, but this event is interrupting the creature's home as much as yours. They were here first. If all else fails, I'll certainly defend us to the death, but that can't be our first option. I folded my arms and leaned against the sturdy new door frame. So how do we deal with this then? Knock it out with a dart gun and drag it out to your truck? Van shook his head, missing my sarcasm completely. No way to know for sure if my darts would actually work. If they did, where would we release him? The woods? A zoo? I don't know. Anywhere else? I have a few ideas I'd like to try first, you know.
The first of these ideas was so obvious, it almost seemed too easy, barricading the pantry door. I admit, I didn't have a ton of faith in the 2x4s we used to seal the opening. Just as I predicted, the extra layer of protection bought us 2 solid thuds before the invisible entity crashed through and continued its routine. Well, at least it didn't walk through the door, quipped the ever-positive trapper.
Our next attempt involved sealing the cabinet with a plywood sheet, upon which I carefully copied the sealing rune from the inside of the closet door. We spread a line of salt across the kitchen floor, then another across the hall for good measure. The salt and sigils did little to deter the creature. At the stroke of midnight, a familiar pounding shattered any illusion I had for an easy resolution. Thud, thud, crash. And why do you think it didn't hold? I asked Van the next morning, while we swept up the damage. I've never quite had much luck with those glyphs. He stopped to lean against his broom, contemplating. I wonder if there is a ritual component needed to make them work, or maybe they were meant to prevent someone on the other side from opening the door, not our friend from kicking it down.
I mulled this over for a moment, before an idea came to me. What if we just pull it out?
Pulled what out? The cabinet. Van made a face like he'd tasted something sour. Where would that get us? You said the opening to this turtle tunnel, whatever you want to call it, is something we can't see or interact with, right? He nodded. I want to know if this opening is just sort of hanging there, or if it's physically linked to the back of the cabinet. Van snapped his fingers. Now you're getting somewhere, eh? If you're right, we could just put the cabinet in the closet, brick it back up again.
Pretty much just shorten the distance of the tunnel from a few dozen feet to a fraction of an inch. Yeah, I agreed.
Of course, it was easier said than done. Even from the moment we began unscrewing the cabinet from its wall mounts, something felt profoundly wrong. My first instinct is to describe the space inside the cabinet as cold, but that doesn't quite fit. Imagine a steady trickle of ice water running down your spine. Goosebumps covered my arms, along with a prickling, almost biting sensation. The last time I'd felt this way was the afternoon I'd accidentally broken the seal on the closet door. That should do it. Van stepped out from the back of the pantry cabinet and closed the door. He got into a squat position and wrapped his fingers under the lip of the frame. Ready? I joined him. On three, he said. 1, 2, 3. We both pulled. The cabinet scraped a few inches along the linoleum. As soon as we began moving it, a high-pitched howling noise began to echo from within the cabinet. It sounded impossibly far off at first, growing in volume and proximity like an approaching jet. The wood shook. Van dropped his end. Run! He shoved me away from the door an instant before it burst open. An unseen thing rushed through the air, smashing into the living room wall and shattering the glass-framed picture that had been hanging there. A few pebble-sized pieces of broken glass hung in the air a moment, clinging to the unseen creature's fur. Get back to the room. Shut the door. Van threw back his coat and drew a pistol from his hip holster. He fired at least half a dozen shots. No, pellets, each exploding in a spatter of neon green paint. Van's gambit had worked. Thanks to the paintball marks, I could track the general motion and position of its torso, and one arm. It also seemed to really piss the creature off. The beast let out an unnatural sound, alien to the animal kingdom, and loud enough to bring pain to my ears, like the gnashing of metal machine parts that were never meant to touch. In a single, fluid motion, Van ducked a swipe from the paint-spattered arm, discarded his pistol, and drew a shimmering Bowie knife from a sheath just above his boot. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, feinting with half-thrusts and slices as he tried to reposition himself by the haul. Something, probably the creature's tail, yanked Van's foot from underneath him, hoisting the trapper into the air by his ankle. "Get out!" he yelled. "Lock yourself in." I ignored him, making a move for the blade. My hand closed around the paracord-wrapped handle. Not a second later, a set of invisible, enormous fingers wrapped around my upper body and hoisted me into the air. I squirmed and struggled, pushing against the calloused, leathery hide that seemed to cover the creature's palm. "The knife!" Van hollered. Of course. I sank the blade down to the grip into the beast's forearm. I twisted and wrenched the blade free, showering the kitchen with a spray of dark, shimmering fluid. The invader howled again as I brought the knife down a second time. But as I raised my hand and to deliver a third stab, it dropped Van, wheeled around, and shoved me through the back of the closet wall. I flinched, expecting to be slammed into a solid wall. The sensation that came was more like plunging into cold water. The hand relinquished me and sent me tumbling through the dark, fluid space. My eventual impact with the ground, though soft and spongy, knocked the breath from my body. I gasped and wheezed as I lay on my back, trying to fill my lungs. A swirling sky stared down at me, tendrils of pink and black dancing like oil on water, but never mixing. As I sat up, my palms squelched in a thick bed of grass, sodden with a sticky fluid. I couldn't tell whether its red color was from the unnatural sun, casting the kind of light one would see in a dark room. Droplets of the liquid seemed to be welling up from the vegetation, drifting skyward. Was this the domain of the creature in my pantry? Crimson forest with twisted, sickly trees? And why had I been seemingly abandoned here? Would it eat me? Could it eat me? If not, for what purpose was it keeping me here? Panicking certainly wouldn't help me. I took a deep breath and decided to take stock of my surroundings. I stood near the shore of what looked like a lake of bubbling black tar. The trees, though thin and spindly, reached higher than some of the tallest redwoods in California. From their branches hung a sickly sort of moss, black and stringy, as if it had been fished from the rancid shower drain of some hairy cosmic being. The place felt oddly finite in a way I couldn't describe. Some feeling in the back of my head told me that if I strayed too far from the lake, the forest would simply cease to be. "You dropped this." I wheeled around, almost losing my balance. A woman stood at the tree line holding Van's knife. Long, dark hair framed her pale, hollowed face. From her complexion, it was clear she hadn't seen the sun in months, maybe years. Her tattered dress would have matched her skin tone perfectly, were it not for the filthy stains and spatters. She approached me barefoot, toes squishing softly in the mud, with the blade held out in her arm. It still shimmered in the void light that seemed to taint everything in this place. Instinctively, I recoiled, nearly losing my balance again. Whoa, who are you? Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. She stood still and lowered the blade. Forgive me if I've forgotten my manners. It's been quite a while since I've spoken with anyone. Where... I stopped myself. This wasn't the important question. Who are you? The woman gave me a blank stare, so I repeated the question. Who are you? She blinked and shook her head, like I'd just jolted her awake. Sorry. Like I said, it's been a while since anyone has asked me that. Almost forgot. She chuckled. I'm Mel, but I'm guessing you're more interested in what I do and how I got here. By here, she meant the macabre forest, sopping wet with unknown ichor and glowing a sickly shade of darkroom red beneath a sunless sky. Well, yeah, I admitted. Short answer is, I'm a scientist in a bit of a niche field. In layman's terms, we observe and control the migration of unnatural creatures through the earthly plane. Wait, no. She stopped herself and tapped her foot, thinking. Unnatural is the wrong word. They are natural, just not native to our world. My head hurt. That doesn't sound layman. Could you try explaining it like you would to a kindergartner? She smiled. In the beginning, there was a forest. This forest. She held up her arms, gesturing toward the world around us. Then, our universe was born. It divided the forest in half in a way that is very difficult for a third-dimensional being to understand. 5-year-old, I reminded her. Right, like a highway paved right through the middle of a jungle. Critters from one side will naturally try to wander to the other side. Sometimes, it's unpredictable, and that could cause problems for humans. Or I guess, the drivers, in this analogy, she explained. My team made sure they crossed the road in predictable places. By making turtle tunnels, I finished for her. Yes, that's exactly right. Give yourself more credit. You understand me just fine. That's how Van explained it to me. Van Becken? Friendly Midwesterner? That's him. No shit, Van's a bright kid. Probably my best intern. Intern? Yeah, he works with me part-time while he's working on his undergrad degree. Who is he to you? Pretty much a discount ghostbuster. I hired him from the classifieds to get some mystery monster out of my apartment. I don't know how to break this to you, but Van's not a kid. How old is he, do you think? Mel asked. Late 30s, probably. Maybe early 40s. Her eyes widened. I've been in here longer than I thought. He was 19 when I got stuck. But you don't look like I'm all that old. Well, yeah. Time doesn't work on your body here the way it does back home. I don't need to eat or drink. I can shut my eyes, but I never fall asleep. I breathe out of instinct, but we don't need to. The sky overhead flickered with ethereal lightning. That's our cue. We don't want to be here when it gets back. Mel grabbed my wrist and dragged me into the tree line, parting curtains of writhing moss and pulling my feet free of the underbrush that seemed to tug at my ankles if I loitered too long. After about 15 minutes of walking, we came to a clearing that seemed to be slightly elevated above the perpetual mire that seemed to fill the wood. Encircling this little island were about a dozen chest-high stones, protruding like rotten teeth from infected gums. The surfaces of the crooked pillars bore innumerable glyphs similar to the ones I'd seen in my hidden closet. At the center of this clearing stood an enormous hollow tree, concealing a carved earth staircase between its roots. We descended into a subterranean room I can only describe as a witch's hut. The place seemed to be lit by jars, crammed with writhing, glowing insects that seemed to flash brighter each time they plinked against the glass. A vat of luminescent liquid bubbled over a ghostly green flame, flickering off in the far reaches of the room. I had to stoop to avoid brushing my head on a multitude of unknowable ingredients hanging on hooks from the ceiling. Please excuse the mess, but do make yourself at home. We're safe here? Safe is relative here, but yeah. She placed the knife on a stone workbench and began looking through a set of crudely made tools. Did you build this place? I asked. No, I inherited it from the Ant. The who? They lived in the forest before there ever was an Earth. I'm 80% sure a few of them got trapped in our realm and became early humans. The rest, I imagine, have been thriving on the other side of the turtle tunnels. safely separated from their natural predators. She plucked a hammer and chisel and began beating on the edge of the blade, breaking off slivers of the shimmering ethereal metal and pulverizing them into a violet powder. "What the hell are you doing?" "Getting us out of here." She swept the powder into the palm of her hand, then sprinkled it into the simmering vat. It bubbled ferociously, turning a shade of sparkling purple. She retreated into the shadows and returned with a book that appeared to be bound with crimson bark and sinew. The And were incredibly gifted with magic. They used ringways. Portals, basically, Sobens, to travel between different parts of the forest, she explained. "There's one here. Only one." "Where does it go?" I asked. "Excellent question." She flipped through the book, giving me glimpses of incomprehensible scrawlings and sigils. "Based on my understanding, a small village, everything left behind here, indicates that they live in dispersed tribal societies. I'm guessing the reason you haven't gone through them has something to do with the knife I came here with?" I gestured to the shattered blade, sitting on the workbench. "Good guess. I'm assuming you got it from Van?" I nodded. "We use it in a lot of equipment. Very rare. Very hard to procure. Can't find any of it on this side of the forest, believe me. The simple explanation is the ringway wasn't designed for us. Humans. But I've come up with a way to fudge it. Trick the magic into working for us. We just need to let it simmer for a while." She waved a hand at the concoction. I raised a skeptical eyebrow, not quite liking the sound of the idea, but kept my concerns to myself. The brewing process took a little less than an hour. During that time, I shared a little about my situation in the condo, but mostly, I just let Mel talk. I understood little, but I didn't have the heart to interrupt. After 2 decades of maddening solitude, I'm sure she was just thrilled to have the company. She spent a long time describing her magnum opus, a device she liked to call the hole puncher, and how a miscalibration led to the accident that sent her to the dark forest. "Probably how we punched a hole through your condo, too, come to think of it," she theorized. When the liquid turned a shade of periwinkle, Mel poured about a shot's worth into 2 makeshift glasses. "Drink this, every drop. We only get to do this once." I held my nose and winced in anticipation of an awful taste that never came. The elixir went down like buttercream and honey that left an inexplicable tang on my tongue. I briefly considered asking for more, but stopped myself when a searing headache burned behind my eyes. I squeezed them shut and saw a world on fire. The dark corners of the hovel were now lit clear as day. Strange auroras swirled around certain objects on the bookshelf and workbench. Mel, too, appeared wreathed in lights of a color I didn't recognize. "My eyes," I managed. "It will wear off, but we need to be on the other side before then. Come on." She dragged me out of the hollowed tree and onto the island. The encircling pillars now glowed like jewels, giving off wavering auroras that licked at encroaching foliage. While the environment certainly looked brighter, I couldn't see better. It was like the forest was blanketed by mist. My shoes slapped against the wet ground as our pace quickened into a light jog. The sound echoed in my ears and was soon joined with a kind of low, heavy breathing that made me shudder. Something followed us between the trees. Our pace quickened. "Can you hear it too?" Mel grimaced and nodded. "Don't turn around." The breathing grew into a growl I recognized from all those nights spent cowering behind my bedroom door. My instincts got the better of me. I turned and felt a scream catch in my throat. I'd been wrong about the fur. The brute peering at us from between the twisted trees was covered in quills like an overgrown porcupine. Each looked to be the size of a stiletto dagger and just as sharp, with fewer and smaller spines hanging from gorilla-like arms. My mind reeled as it took stock of the creature, fixating on a horrifying idea. It hadn't seemed interested in eating me before, but now, a greasy black tongue snaked out from between long jaws and jagged teeth, tasting the air and jerking its head in little nods of approval. "Mel." By the time I turned, she had already taken off running. For the first time since college, I broke into a sprint. The beast behind me let out a throaty clicking sound, swelling into a screech. Its lumbering footfalls seemed to shake the ground beneath my feet. I had no clue how fast this thing could move, but quickly realized it may not matter. Each passing breath seared my lungs, and my aching legs felt every pound I'd put on since entering the workforce. My lack of fitness may kill me before the creature did. Mel was still only a dozen or so feet ahead of me, deftly jumping over the reaching tendrils of undergrowth. The lake was in sight, still a solid inky black against the crimson world. "Swim to the bottom," she shouted over her shoulder.
Before I could question her, she leapt with arms outstretched and dove into the mysterious liquid. I skidded to a stop just beyond the edge, looking frantically between the bubbling goo and the tree line. The beast slowed to a stop at the tree line, tasting the air again. It knew it had me cornered. I looked back to the lake. Mel still hadn't resurfaced. My pursuer lowered itself onto its haunches, preparing to pounce. In an act of desperation, I followed Mel's lead, flinging my body into the unknown fluid. Whatever the liquid was, it was almost repulsively warm. It was also somehow far less dense than water, allowing me to sink almost effortlessly toward the bottom. I reoriented my body, trying to swim down to hasten my descent as Mel suggested. While I couldn't see her through the shifting, murky gloom, I did see movement. Unknown objects and vague shapes shifted and skittered like eels in the dark. Something brushed my leg, lingering at my ankle. The scaly, slimy thing looped around me, grabbing on. Panic set in. I instinctively took a breath, filling my aching lungs with the black fluid. I choked and gasped for air, only taking in more of the vile substance. My throat and sinuses burned as my body screamed for oxygen. The tendril tugged my body back toward the surface, toward air maybe, but also certain death at the hands of the creature. Mel had assured me the only chance at escape was at the bottom. I kicked and tugged, freeing my leg to swim down toward the shimmering depths. Shimmering. I squinted my aching eyes against the gloom. Was that light ahead? I fluttered my feet as hard and fast as they could go, flailing my arms like a madman as my muscles spasmed in excruciating hypoxia. I reached out, and my hand broke the surface. My stomach turned inside out as my sense of gravity reoriented. I'd swam to the bottom and reached the top. A pair of strong arms reached around me, wrenched me from the deep and into a blinding, brilliant light. The hands that hoisted me from the bubbling tar were not gentle. They threw my sputtering, thrashing form onto the damp clay of the cosmic lake shore. I wiped thick, oily residue from my eyes, staring up at a cranberry sky. The silhouette of a humanoid form loomed over me, staring down with slitted reptilian eyes. The creature easily stood 7 feet tall, body clad in orange and cyan scales beneath an umber tunic. It looked a bit like an enormous tokai gecko, an invasive species that had swept across the swamps of my home state. It opened its broad mouth and made a bizarre series of sounds, halfway between barking and squeaking. Was this speech? Hello, I stammered. What else could I say? The creature appeared unsatisfied with my response because its next action was to grab the front of my shirt with its large, bulbous fingers. It drew me close enough to count the pointed teeth, lining a mouth large enough to accommodate my head. "Hey," Mel hollered. She prodded the creature in the chest, tugged at its tunic, and pointed at something on the ground nearby. It followed her finger with its gaze, squinted, and relinquished me before moving to get a closer look. I sat up and saw Mel standing over a cluster of symbols, drawn hastily in the mud. The markings looked familiar, but I couldn't place where I knew them from. The gecko nodded, seeming to understand. He turned back to me, offered his hand, and pulled me up. He made another vocalization and beckoned. "Come on." Mel grabbed my arm and tugged me along. The creature led us down an actual footpath, lined with more of the chest-height stones that had wreathed Mel's hideaway. Creeping roots and shrubs seemed unable or unwilling to encroach beyond them and onto the walkway. Packed clay turned to gravel, then cobblestone as the walkway widened. Here, banisters linked the walkway barriers together. Overhead, arches supported hanging lamps that swung in a gentle breeze, their yellow glow barely penetrating the darkness of the jungle. The path curved and began an ascent up a steep staircase, each step roughly the height of my knee. After a laborious climb, we crested a ridge looking out over an enormous crater valley. From the trees rose soaring towers that could rival the skyscrapers of any modern city, though instead of metal and glass,
These structures seemed to be hewn from a uniform piece of pristine marble. Between the spires stood similarly enormous temples, ziggurats, and gathering halls. A teeming population of the man-sized geckos teemed across dizzying walkways that linked the higher floors. The city looked simultaneously ancient and pristine, as if a metropolis had been abandoned, overgrown, and restored to its former glory without removing any of the foliage. I elbowed Mel. I thought you said they lived in small, tribal villages. Looks like I misjudged them. Our savior led us down the crater wall and into their city, which was every bit as breathtaking up close as it was from afar. Storefronts peddling food, trinkets, and other oddities lined the boulevard, their stone facades absent of any windows or doors. At the end of our chosen street, an octagonal building stood, wreathed by fat columns. From its position, I guessed it to be some kind of city center. It seemed every one of the geckos that spotted us paused and stared, pointing and making hushed vocalizations to one another. By the time we reached the steps of the central building, a nervous-looking army seemed to follow us. Our escort seemed to regard the crowd with an uneasy eye, rushing us inside the building and through the first set of doors we had actually seen since arriving. Stone relief carvings lined the cavernous hall, which was otherwise empty of any inhabitant or decoration. The creature gestured toward them with a grunt, and I tried to take in the sculpted images in passing. The first scene showed a forest, where the reptilian creatures scampered between knotted trees, looking back in terror at their pursuer, a shadowy figure advancing from behind them. In the second, a group stood clustered around a glowing crystal shard, palms outstretched in awe. The third depicted a triumphant scene, wielding slates that crackled with magical energy. The beings stood around what I took to be a sphere of woven branches, within which their tormentor stood trapped. With their adversary apparently imprisoned, the fourth panel showed their flourishing empire. If my interpretation was correct, they seemed to conjure the city into being, rather than sculpting it. This would certainly explain why everything appeared to be made from the exact same seamless stone. The fifth and final carving showed what looked like a bridge, leading to a rune-wreathed circular gateway. Along the bridge stood more of the gecko creatures, brandishing their magical tablets and what looked to be ceremonial halberds. It was difficult to tell whether this was meant to represent a march, ceremony, or fortification. There was little time to ponder its meaning. Our guide whisked us through another door into a grand circular chamber with ceilings higher than a Gothic cathedral. A council of robed creatures leered down from a tall, semicircular table that wrapped around the room's back wall. There must have been a dozen of them, wizened with faded color markings. Our guide exchanged vocalizations with one of the counselors, who dismissed them with a wave of their hand before leaning farther forward to study Mel and me. It pulled back its lips and let out a croaking, hoarse approximation of human speech. "You are... man. You can talk?" I felt the idiotic question leave my mouth before I could catch myself. "Yes." I am Mel. This is..." She paused, looking to me for help. I realized I'd never given her my name.
Gabriel.
"Gabriel," she repeated. "What shall we call you?" "And..." The gecko gestured to the panel, then himself. "Ek." "We are honored to meet you." She bowed her head. "I think what my friend here meant to ask is, how did you come to learn our language?"
For ages, and live, grow here, and believe and magic trap Gradern, and wrong.
"What is Gradern?" I struggled to imitate the sound in my throat. "Human word." Ek considered this a moment. His mouth twitched as he struggled to pronounce the vowels. "Devourer." "The monster with the quills? The points?" Mel asked. Ek nodded. "Many and forget magic. Hard to learn. Need discipline, and home built. Gradern trapped. Why need magic?" The creature's shoulders fell. "Long ago, during Ek life," he pointed to himself once more. "Gradern find way through. Gate on bridge, and weak with no magic. No, and fight. Hundreds devoured, and gather brave. Fight through gate. Close on other side, and learn someone else make wall. Wall is human world." "So you built a new protective barrier on the human side," I said. "But a door is never as strong as a wall. So you needed to keep coming back to perform some kind of ritual." "Yes, Ek have discipline. Ek know old magic. Ek perform rituals, listen at door, learn human speech, hear this human voice. He pointed at me. Gabriel, destroy barrier. Shit, Mel interjected, saving me from an incriminating blunder. But why not repair the barrier? It worked for years. Ek shook his head. Barrier made with great sacrifice. No one willing. Then what will you do? She asked. And council vote. And gather strongest warriors. Find humans to make sacrifice instead. Human sacrifices? A set of smooth, clammy hands closed around each of my arms, dragging me sharply backward. Mel! I yelled out and turned my head. A pair of the lizard-like and had also entered silently to seize her. They dragged us, screaming through the deeper recesses of the keep. I could no longer see Mel, only the projection of her long shadow, thrashing against the and. In those recesses, under the pale yellow glow of the luminescent bug lamps, the corridor's architecture changed. The walls lost their uniform quality. Roots the size of stovepipes had burst through the walls to spread their tendrils throughout the tunnel. Cyclopean stones patched these gaps with sloppy spatterings of mud-colored mortar. This repair technique conjured the image of rotting, sickly skin grafted over a healthy extremity. I wondered, even in my panic, whether the sorcery employed to build this city had been lost to the and. When we rounded the corner, I had a new concern. Our captors hauled me past a low table, lined with rows of what looked like surgical tools. They dragged me onto a cold slab, binding my arms at my sides. I kicked and thrashed until a rough hand forced my legs back against the stone, securing them in place. Out of my view, one of the captors began prodding around my abdomen, as if it were giving me an involuntary medical exam. Then it clicked. That's exactly what was happening. The tools, restraints, they were going to cut me open on this damn table. X spoke from the shadows, erasing any doubt in my mind, and will understand human inside out, learn weakness, then travel to human world. Get the hell away from me. The probing hands made their way up my body, pressing on the lymph nodes on either side of my neck. The creature they belonged to loomed overhead, surveying me with bulging reptilian eyes. It peeled back my gums to inspect my teeth, babbling something in its alien tongue to an associate. I jerked my head forward and bit down, hard. The creature shrieked, trying to tug its hand free. I clenched my jaw with every ounce of strength I had. Something crunched, and a bitter taste flooded my mouth, along with tepid, sappy fluid. Metal clattered. Sharp, piercing pain radiated from my core. I screamed, writhing against the restraints as warm blood seeped into my shirt. My assailant pulled his hand free, looking down in panic at the green fluid spurting from his gnarled digit. With my head raised off the slab, I could see the handle of a scalpel-like tool protruding from my gut. I also noticed the other occupants of the room, pointing at their injured compatriot, backing away while uttering anxious words in their native tongue. Gradrin smell blood, human doom best, and doctor. Eke pointed an accusatory finger at me. Both go to bridge. The now bleeding examiner darted for the exit, but was stopped by a group of geckos with long spears leveled, driving him back to the table like a pack of border collies, assigned to herd a single sheep. Ek barked an order in and speak. The examiner lowered his head in apparent shame, turned back to me, and wrenched the tool free of my stomach. I screamed again. My pain quickly became shock when I watched him dress the wound. Gradrin smell blood. Save blood for bridge. The creatures seemed terrified of the idea of their blood being drawing the creature into their citadel. I turned my head to the table beside me, where another doctor seemed to be beginning the same prodding and probing process on Mel. They were still planning to dissect her. I spat a mouthful of and blood as far as I could, hoping enough would land on Mel to make a difference. Judging by X's shriek of rage, it had. Now you must take all three of us to the bridge. The bridge, it turned out, was the site of the same scene depicted in the atrium's final panel. A delicate archway spanned a chasm that must have measured 300 feet across, and triple that in depth. On the and side rose a fortified defense tower, ramparts crowded with and, clutching their spears and sigil slates. The opposite end rested against a sheer cliffside, just beneath the maw of a perfectly circular tunnel. The shape seemed unnatural, like something made with an enormous drill. Runes encircled this opening, beyond which hung a curtain of absolute darkness. Ek and his followers marched Mel, the injured gecko, and me out onto the bridge, prodding us in the backs with their spears when we slowed our pace. Once we were at the center of the span, they retreated behind a door that slammed loud enough to make my ears ring. I'd half expected the creature to attack me, but he never did. He just kept his head down, shaking. Nerves, maybe? Out of the frying pan, into the fire, Mel muttered. Yeah, you're welcome for saving you from the dissecting table. She rolled her eyes. My hero, you have a plan then. Not much of a long-term thinker, in case you haven't noticed, but through there, it's my condo, I think. If we get to the other side, can you reseal the barrier? Close the tunnel somehow. Ek is right, she said. It will require a sacrifice. But yes, if we make it through, I think I can close the way behind us, assuming Van is still there and hasn't put some idiotic trap in place. Then we'll make it through. I looked across the blood-stained paving stones to the curtain of blackness, now parting to admit a familiar hulking form. We'll make it through or die trying. The bridge shook beneath the padding footfalls of the creature. Stiletto knife quills, gleaming crimson beneath the otherworldly sky, blanketed the beast's body, save for its hands, face, and prehensile tail. Leathery, crocodile jaws parted, and the Gudrun tasted the air with the slimy eel tail that was its tongue. Tar-black gums pulled back in a snarl, baring teeth like shattered china. It paused, no doubt catching the potent smell of and blood. A low growl followed, sending tremors down my spine. Would this be how I died, flayed on an ancient bridge, feet from my home? The and between Mel and me began to shake uncontrollably. My hopes of escape evaporated as the Gurdurn left the tunnel and stepped out onto the span. There was hardly any room on either side of the beast. Trying to skirt around would surely end with us impaled on its quills. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for setting all of this off. Mel sighed. If you hadn't, I'd still be trapped on the other side of the ringway. You brought me this. She drew a shard of Van's broken flyneve, tucked beneath her waistband. In one fluid motion, she drove the jagged metal into the neck of the and between us and kicked him in the backside. It clutched at the wound, stumbling and staggering forward toward the advancing Grodren. This way, Mel pulled herself up onto one of the low walls, penning in the bridge. I clambered up after her, onto a ledge not much wider than my feet. Run! Mel had already taken off sprinting, arms outstretched at shoulder height for balance. The Gredren, meanwhile, seemed to zero in on the wounded, and, now on its knees, soaked in blood. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible wind up as the Gredren sank a half-inch onto its haunches. Then a blur, viscera, screams, gnashing teeth, and the mangled torso of the and, wedged between ravenous jaws. The sound of its gruesome feeding sent me darting along the wall as fast as I could with the injury I'd sustained. Every step sent a jolt of pain through my abdomen, causing me twice to nearly lose footing. My feet already struggled to find purchase on stones, polished smooth by howling wind, and the urge to look down into the gaping abyss below became almost magnetic. I held my breath as I hobbled past the creature. Something changed. It paused in its feeding to taste the air once more. Could it smell my blood? I froze, feeling my hammering heartbeat count out the longest few seconds of my life, before the creature returned to its meal. I skirted by, dropped off the wall, hobbled the rest of the way across the bridge, and followed Mel into the blackness. The dark was solid, the same viscous tar-like substance we swam through in the ringway. As was the case within the depths of the black pool, unseeable entities bumped and brushed beside me. I imagined snaggletooth tarpon and anglerfish roaming in the void and hoping for an easy meal. No, I wouldn't be consumed. Not when I was this close. My lungs strained. The overpowering reflex to inhale betrayed me, causing the inky black to flood my body. The more I choked and sputtered, the more I inhaled, thrashing like a drowning man at the bottom of the sea. My hand before me broke the surface of something. I staggered out of the darkness, tripping over half-spent candles and scraps of splintered wooden boards, before falling on all fours and retching black ichor on the cheap carpet. My carpet. Easy there, dude, a familiar voice said in a thick Minnesotan accent. I'd grown so accustomed to the red glow of that alien sky, the bright work lights left me blinking and scrambling to shield my face. Get up. There's no time, Mel said. After all these years, you know? What a trip. Van, no time. I need willow charcoal. Got some right here. Van held out a thin black stick in his artificial arm. Mel reached, hesitated, then paused, her curiosity temporarily displacing urgency. What? How? Oh, this thing, eh? Damn bird tore the old one clean off. You know me, though. Slipped away. Got a new one. Works great, too. While I shuddered at the thought of a bird large and powerful enough to rip off a human limb, Van showed off the dexterity in his mechanical fingers by rolling the chalk across his knuckles. Van! Mel snatched the stick, turned, and started scratching out hasty symbols around the edges of rippling shadow on the closet wall. Only in that moment did I realize I could actually see the ringway embedded in the wall. How long do we have? Sorry, Van asked. Until the creature comes back? How long do we have? Until it's done feeding, I guess. Hard to say. It doesn't make a lot of noise, and we couldn't see it before. Why could I see it now? Was it a product of the concoction Mel gave me? Maybe it was a lingering side effect of the time I spent in that place. Then we need to move fast. Mel stepped out of the closet and slammed the door shut. Where's the other entrance? The one you fell through? I'll show you. Here. I led her down the hall to the kitchen, inside the back of that cabinet. She crawled inside and began to work, rattling off instructions over the clacking and scraping of the willow charcoal. If I copy the exact same glyphs from the inside of your closet, the two ends of the turtle tunnel will merge. No more Gudjern in your condo. How does that work? A little like two halves of a broken bone growing back together. How do I help? Hold that closet door. Keep it shut with everything you've got. When do we let go? You'll know. The air in the hallway swam like a mirage. Thin spider silk tendrils drifted through the air, growing from within the spare room and spiraling toward the kitchen, like two bones growing back together. Van had already started to pile furniture against the closet door, which the ethereal fibers seemed to pass through as if it were wide open. We need to hold it, yeah? He asked, until she finishes the ritual. I bent over and grabbed the edge of the pull-out couch, dragging it across the room until it was square against the edge of the furniture pile. Van threw his shoulder against the bookshelf beside the door, edging it into the gap between the sofa and the wall.
So she understands what all these symbols mean now? Seems so. I guess she had a lot of time to practice.
Suppose you're right. A dull thud impacted the door, rattling the line of furniture. Shit. Mel, I don't mean to rush you there, but hey, I think we have a visitor at the door. After a pause, she called back, Almost there? Gudjern thumped against the wood once more, rattling the frame. Cracks sprouted from its upper corners, racing across the wall. It'll hold, right? I turned to face Van, only to see the trapper backing away, slowly. Right. He said nothing. My mind jumped back to those nights spent in silent fear, with that thing pawing at my bedroom door. It had held barely. Of course, this was cheaper, thinner wood. That's it. I'm done, she called. Another impact. Splinters and plaster chunks fell. If Mel had finished, why was the Gudjern still here? I'm not sure it's working. Are we missing anything? Van asked. They said the ritual needs a sacrifice to work. That must be it, I said, before yelling the question. What did you sacrifice to seal the tunnel? Mel answered in a grim tone, all of them. Right as the Gudjern broke through the door with a deafening crash, a flash of coral pink light bloomed in the hall. For an instant the creature stood, tall and terrifying. Passing straight through its chest were the enchanted threads, rooted in the glyphs Mel had drawn on the wall around the ringway. They began to twist and swirl together, not unlike a thin and horizontal funnel cloud. It stepped forward and spaghettified, swept away as if by the current of a flash-flooding river. I blinked, and the beast was gone, out of sight. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I couldn't truly appreciate what Mel had meant in the heat of the moment. Only after did I realize what she had done to stitch reality back together. The sacrifice was the ritual's result itself, an untold multitude of and left to be devoured by their eternal enemy.
I'm still living in my condo, but plan to sell it as soon as my financial situation allows. When the moonlight hits just right, I can still see that shimmering strand snaking its way through my home, the place where Mel wounded the universe itself and stitched it back together. Thank you for watching the video fully. Please hit the like and subscribe button, since I could not make these videos without your support, and it means the world to me.